Good morning, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform. This time I have Bob Ferrari from Supply Chain Matters, very good friend and a long-term observer of supply chain trends. Bob, thank you for joining me. Hope you're not too cold up in New England. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Vin. It's a pleasure to join you and speak with you again. Always value our conversations. The short of it, in terms of my background, I've been in the supply chain management area for a good many years, very much into the technology of supply chain management as well as business processes. In my background, I've been a supply chain industry analyst for top tier firms. And then in 2008, I decided to go independent, somewhat like you. I started my own industry analyst firm as well as founded the Supply Chain Matters blog, both of which exist today. We have global-wide readership, as you can imagine, for supply chain. And this has been the golden era of supply chain management, without a doubt. And we have had an incredibly eventful year, as maybe we can talk about.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's start with that. In some ways, it seems like every supply chain broke down, right? The whole PPE, hand sanitizers, so on. The food chain broke down, meatpacking plants, the whole high-tech, China-dependent supply chains clearly broke down. And yet, we have coped in an unbelievable way, right? The e-commerce scaling has been amazing. The last mile delivery logistics have been amazing. And you have a much more expansive view of supply chains. Tell us what you've seen, good and bad.
Yeah, there's two perspectives to this. First of all, to the notion that they broke down, they didn't really break down. I mean, there was a lot of media hype in here. Yossi Sheffi, MIT professor who is widely followed, just released his new book, The New Abnormal. And he flatly states in this new book, and I agree with him, by the way, this was supply chain's finest hour. And it was indeed. But yes, those of us as consumers, we saw visually what happened here, because what happened here that was so much different than any other disruptions that global supply chain teams have dealt with. This was simultaneous disruption. In other words, product demand fell off the cliff. At the same time, supply networks all got disrupted. So, right after the pandemic hit, let's say in the Europe and the US in the March time period, supply chain management executives looked at the landscape and said, oh my God, what are we going to do here? And literally they went into war room mentality. And we're now hearing all the stories of that. But basically what they did is they had to do a lot of assessment. They had to do some quick decision making, and they rallied. So the early parts of that, the symptoms are definitely what you saw. And for specific industries like PPE, pharmaceuticals, drugs and stuff like that, there were structural problems, and they're still there today. But everybody's rallied, and it's been an incredible response. One of the things I do on Supply Chain Matters now to keep, supply chain teams informed is like every month, I think you may be familiar, there is the PMI reports, the global reporting of production and supply chain activity. And in November, there is a classic V response. There's been a complete response to that. By November, we are at pre-COVID production levels across the globe. And it's extraordinary. That was the response of many multi-industry supply chains. So it was there. There were blips. There have been a lot of lessons. And that'll get us into the conversation of what's coming.
So I'm hearing, and maybe you have a more optimistic view, which I love hearing about, but I'm hearing a couple of things that happen. One is on the demand side, companies are saying we may have had too much choice. Let's simplify a bunch of SKUs. Let's not offer so many colors and other choices, right? And then on the supply chain, especially on the global side, I'm hearing a lot of China plus one or China plus two type of rejiggering of supply chains. Tell us what you're hearing on both sides.
Yes. So let's take them one at a time. In terms of what, we call it SKU simplification. And when the first assessments were done in consumer product areas, all different types of consumer product areas, high tech, whatever, when they assessed what was going on in product demand, if you were in the consumer side, everybody was hoarding, as we remember, right? Everybody call it pantry loading, whatever you want to call it. So if you looked at
toilet papers, I mean, most people probably have a 5-year supply.
Exactly. That was what the media covered, the empty shelves of toilet paper and paper towels and what have you. But it was yogurt. It was all sorts of things that when we got forced to stay at home, we needed to consume or wanted to consume. So when supply chain teams look at that, and then at this point, they're into their war room command center mentalities. They looked at all this and they said, okay, look, we can't rely on product demand forecasts anymore because they're out of whack. There's what we call the bullwhip effect going in. Everybody's overreacting. So there's no reliability of the data. Secondly, already they knew that the supply networks were disrupted by, people couldn't get to work. Factories were shut down temporarily. Transportation was shut down. So they knew there was a problem there. So part of that early decision-making was exactly what you described. They looked at this and said, all right, let's say if we're in, if we go to a supermarket and you go to the yogurt aisle, the shelf is full of yogurt, all different varieties, all different colors, whatever. But supply chain demand planners know damn well that there's probably 20% of that actually accounts for most of the product demand. The rest is consumer choice or preference or whatever. So they had to make some decisions, and that's exactly the decisions that we saw. They basically said, look, let's just go for the variety that we know will get us demand. At the same time, the suppliers have already assured us we'll get supply of at least of this. So they made those decisions. And that cascaded. It wasn't just consumer products. It was in high tech. It was in medical devices. It was in a whole bunch of things. So that was one part of it. When we talk about China, that's a whole different dimension here, because as we got to see here, China was the first that got into the pandemic. There's some belief now that in Q4 of 2019, there were already signs of this happening in China. The real visibility didn't happen till January of this year. So they got hit pretty severely in the first quarter. But they had, as we know now, they had draconian lockdowns, and that was successful. And they came back in March, and they came back with a vengeance. And a lot of that started to recover. And right now, they're going great guns. But taking a step back now, the issue here is that what COVID exposed was all the vulnerabilities of supply chains that emanate from China. And again, in these key industries like PPE, which was, it was just, God, I mean, we could do a webcast just talking about PPE and what was going on. And, it was just, it was a rodeo.
The reagents and the testing.
Yeah, and the planes, the
wings and electronics. I mean, it's on and on and on.
Yeah, U.S. states had a fear on their own of becoming buyers of PPE, no knowledge of the market, and knockoffs and whatever. They were all there. The New England Patriots flying their aircraft right into China to grab PPE from other states. It was like everybody had to do what they had to do. So a lot of lessons there, a lot of change. But I think,
by the way, on that, I interviewed the CEO of TealSoft. It's a procurement visibility service. And they said the UK government was so desperate that their service allowed them to identify, I don't know, thousands of PPE and 95 mask components, probably saved the UK a lot of hassle. But examples like that are over and over again.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Yep. And PPE producers they were picking off, orders that gave them the most profitability.
Sure.
So commitments weren't worth anything, basically. It's a free-for-all market. So again, a lot of lessons. And the China Plus One now is really strategic in the notion of supply chain resilience. And that's the term we're using now. And essentially, to boil it all down, is that a lot of companies got into China 10, 15 years ago, whatever, because it was the lowest cost producer. And that was the primary motivator. Plus, China had matured a lot of their supply networks, extraordinary infrastructure in transportation and logistics. They had all the right things. And, that's how they garnered what they garnered. But the notion of the US-China trade war, the increased geopolitical tensions and all of that, now with COVID exacerbating that, China Plus One now is about translating resilience and risk into that sourcing equation.
But I'm hearing that plus one is not that easy. China has so many deep sea ports, great rail network, and so on. I mean, Vietnam, Malaysia, none of them have quite that. So are you finding that transition is going to be pretty tough?
It will be to some degree, and it's going to be industry specific, Vinnie, very much industry specific. And, some of the ones you want to watch here, we already talked about PPE and pharma, and that's clearly, we can talk about that in a whole webcast. But high tech, consumer electronics, telecommunications, watch that one. Because what's going on there, particularly over the last 3 or 4 months, there's everybody's sensing a new Cold War between China and the US, and it's going to be around high-tech supply chains. And the Trump administration exacerbated that with Huawei technologies and the bans on there, the notion of now banning any business that has to do with China's #1 semiconductor producer. And a lot of things are going on there.
And the whole TikTok episode.
Exactly. Exactly. So that one will be the one to watch for China Plus One. Because in my view, 2021, there's going to be a lot of activity in that area.
Well, I can see why you're so busy and so excited about 2021. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about the cold chain. Obviously it's getting a lot of attention now with especially the Pfizer vaccine needing to be at -70 and so on. But it's been challenged all year round, right? I mean, the food chain with the meatpacking problems, the refrigerated trucks came into play even over there. Tell us what you've been tracking in the cold chain.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating thing to watch as well, because the cold chain has always been a very specialized supply chain of logistics capabilities, of warehousing facilities that are customized for not only cold, but different temperatures, primarily in the food area, but the pharmaceutical area as well. Now, there are stark differences between the two in that pharmaceutical is highly regulated and highly controlled. So a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the carriers, a lot of the service providers are very specialized in this area and garner, premium costs to do that. Now, with the extraordinary challenge of vaccine distribution, which, there's a lot of hype in the media about, this is the greatest logistics challenge we've ever seen. That's not necessarily hype. There's a lot of substance to this. There's a lot of moving parts. we're going to see a lot of hiccups along the way here. And the thing that has really caught my interest in watching this space, private equity is getting into this area really fast now in terms of buying up a lot of the infrastructure properties, the warehouses. We're seeing a lot of activity there. We're seeing a lot of activity in investments.
I've heard that infrastructure was starting to get a little challenged. It was a little dated, but at least what I've seen on TV in the last couple of days, the pharma cold chain seems fairly modern.
It is, but at the same time, it was never built for this level of activity that they're seeing, and that's the problem right now. And the other thing is the players like UPS and FedEx, who are very much players in this, but they're using their networks, as the backdrop of this. Now, picture where we are today. We're recording this in December. We're at the height of the holiday fulfillment right now. All of the FedEx, UPS, all of the omni-channel networks now they're capacity constrained. There's no question about it. And now layer on top of that, they've already done the first distributions of the Pfizer, BioNTech. Moderna is supposed to be approved this weekend. That'll start next week. So FedEx and UPS, for now, the conceivable future of 2021, are going to have to be supporting these things. And that's the one to watch right now. That's where the capacity constraints are really going to show up in a network that's already been taxed.
We don't hear much about what's going on around the world. I mean, the cold chain must be challenged everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Are you tracking what's happening in Europe, or God forbid?
Yeah, similar things. I mean, you have, DHL, Lufthansa Cargo. They're big players in this area in Europe. There's a lot of planning that's gone on. They're gearing up for, I believe, the first quarter to have the bulk of their distributions, because right now Europe is all locked down because of their third wave. So yeah, there's a lot of activity that's going to happen there as well. And again, that's going to be the global crunch because remember, all of the commercial airlines have been really impacted by the dramatic decreases in air travel. So their flights are constrained now. So on the one hand, cold chain is a lifeline to some commercial airlines. Like United Airlines now has been featured in the media. They've already done 9 flights, charter flights of the Pfizer vaccine. So on the one hand, they're going to have a little bit of a lifeline. But on the other hand, there isn't enough commercial aircraft in the air freight segment to be able to support what everybody thinks is going to be the volume of activity here. Mm. So there's going to be some new developments here.
Talking about media hype about biggest logistical challenge. I saw a presentation, must have been 92, around Desert Storm, the logistics of moving all the gear all the way into Saudi Arabia. And I smiled when I heard, hey, this is the biggest logistical challenge, because that was huge, moving that much material. Let's talk technology a little bit. How has existing supply chain planning and execution helped during this time, or are you seeing a new set of players? I mean, I interviewed guys from 6 Rivers,
right?
So automated warehouses and so on. That seems to have played up pretty well in this pandemic. So talk a little bit about the technology landscape. What has impressed you? What has not stepped up quite as much?
Well, in the supply chain planning area, clearly there's been a lot of emphasis here, and it's been a plus. A lot of companies that invested in supply chain planning, especially the advanced stages of this, where more and more supply chain planning technology now is AI enhanced. Machine learning concepts and things like that. Deeper supply chain analytics attached to supply chain planning. They have been tremendously helpful in this area. A lot of companies are providing testimonials that the only way they could get their hands around what was going on was the ability to use some of these tools. And, it's clearly been a help here.
And these have been specialist tools, right? Not the ERP vendors.
Well, to some extent, ERP vendors as well. I mean, it was across the board, so to speak, but clearly Best of Breed was deeper into this and had a lot to offer. And I saw that, and we've all seen that.
A couple of vendors you want to name that's
well, there was a company called Lamasoft, which was very deep into supply chain analytics, simulation, and that sort of thing. Tremendous things were done in that area, and then they got acquired a couple of weeks ago by Copa Software. So we'll see where that goes. Kinaxis has always been a leading company in here, and they were right on top of this from the beginning. And they talk about it today, and their customers provide testimony that a lot of things were done here to try to help companies get a handle on what they needed to do, especially where they needed to put their priorities. Because when everything goes wrong at once, you got to sort it out real quick.
Sure.
Where do we need to put our most attention first? So there's a lot of things here. Execution, supply chain execution, as you pointed out, robotics and warehousing, and that sort of thing. Look at Internet of Things. What do we learn today in the media? One of the stories was that in the distribution of the Pfizer vaccine, they spotted 2 shipments, one in California, one in Alabama, where the temperature of the vaccine was colder than specification. And they literally would not let those shipments be unloaded from the trucks because the Internet of Things, the tags, the temperature tags on those cases were already, in alert, basically saying we've gone beyond threshold. So they stopped it right there. Plus, every one of those shipments was tracked, so to speak. So that was extreme help, I think.
Yeah, I read about the custom software that has been built for tracking all this. It's pretty impressive.
Yes, absolutely. And then, the whole notion of e-commerce and omnichannel, we already talked about that. But, I mean, look at Amazon. I mean, everybody, everybody would want to, look at the power and the influence of Amazon. That's clearly there. But look at the capabilities that they still instilled. They literally pulled in capacity that if they had planned for 3 years from today, and they put it online in about 3 or 4 months, during the middle part of this year. And they're using every bit of that right now.
They don't get as much attention, but Shopify has done similar for.
Yeah, I was going to mention them as well.
SAP was describing their e-commerce volumes have just been off the charts in Europe. So yeah, you're right. E-commerce has scaled amazingly.
And then we should mention the cloud platform providers that have really helped in this area. Microsoft, Oracle, those guys, Open, those things, because platform was very important here, as well as cloud capabilities that could be really spun up for a lot of these companies that were all, where people were, confined to residencies. They needed access to their systems, to their applications, to their information. That was extremely helpful here. Which
brings out the whole Instacarts and the DoorDashes. And I mean, the last mile delivery has been just mind-boggling how well they've coped. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Bob, you're working on you do this every year, but you're working on a 2021 predictions for industry and global supply chains. Right. I know you're still in progress, but give us a little bit of early insight. What do you anything unusual you're seeing?
Yeah, you know what? I'm calling 2021 the year of renewal. That's the theme we're going to have. And we need the theme of renewal is what we've been talking about. There's a lot of supply chain organizations now. They're going to spend 2021 taking a hard look at a lot of these notions of what is really meant by supply chain agility, resilience, synchronization of supply chain processes, supply chain risk, and what does it really mean. So we're looking at this from the notions of new directions, new thinking, new definitions in a lot of these areas. And just to give you two of the real headlines that I think are going to be no-brainers in terms of 2021, we're going to see a lot of emphasis now on end-to-end supply chain visibility and really what that means. And I think it's really going to take a connotation on the aspects of supply chain risk. So it's visibility on the notions of risk and what that all implies. And I think the other one will be a no-brainer will be supply chain digital transformation. Taking what has occurred now this year and really manifesting that to what really needs to occur in terms of capabilities in the next year. So I think that's going to be a lot of that in our themes. And I think in the technology space, we're going to see a lot of change in the technology space as it relates to supply chain technology. I would not be surprised, Vinnie, if we're going to see a lot of M&A activity.
Well, you mentioned private equity starting to get involved in the cold chain. So, in different components of the supply chain, I imagine a lot more VC investment, a lot more private equity investments.
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Any final thoughts, Bob?
It's just going to be an interesting year. I mean,
sounds like you've had a riveting year.
It's just it's been wall to wall busy, good busy kind of thing. But
you know, Bob, I was on a call this week, and people were moaning about what a miserable year 2020 has been. And I said, guys, I've been interviewing executives in every industry and cataloging heroics and acrobatics. I've just been energized by all the human spirit that has come through in this year.
I as well. And I think I mentioned this to you. The other thing is, you know, we all bemoan the travel restrictions and the fact that, you know, we've got to do all our thing on Zoom and whatever. But I find it a blessing now because conferences I never got to attend because, you know, you can never balance the calendar, or forums where supply chain leaders talk about these problems where we never get access to. I'm getting enormous access to that right now. It's done wonders for the ability to, not just me, but others in supply chain management, to hear about what a peer is doing right now. What are they struggling with? Where have they found the answers? And that's going to be very meaningful in the new year.
Yeah, I started a series called the Analyst Camp, one of the other series I've started. And I've been inviting vendors to either allow me to excerpt from their briefings or to brief me in 20-minute chunks. And that's been great. Hopefully more and more, it's starting to accelerate, but more and more are using that. And so, you know, it gives a chance for you and me to share a lot more what we are seeing, and we've seen a lot.
Yeah. I'm doing a lot of that now too.
Yeah. Bob, thank you so much. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Good to see you so energized, and
good to see you as well.
2021 should be a very good year.
Well, hopefully, fingers crossed, we will get a vaccine all deployed. Look to the supply chain.
Well, thanks for your service, and thanks to all the supply chain folks that you track for their amazing service during 2020. And you know what they're doing with the vaccine cold chain is just mind-boggling.
It is, and it will continue to be. And you know, I purposely chose the name Supply Chain Matters for the blog because the notion is supply chain does matter. Wow, will we see that this year and next year? You watch.
Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you.